Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengal podcast presented by FanDuel. Solomon Wilcots joined by our Cincinnati Bengal insider, Charlie Goldsmith. And Charlie, look, Cincinnati Bengals went out to our nation's capital. Yeah, they came away with a win. They get it 31-17. But it was a night where maybe a few things kind of reared its ugly head. One was the lack of fluidity within the offense. Joe Burrow seemed like he was determined to iron out a few wrinkles on offense, even though Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Chase Brown, they came off the field. So he had to get it done with the second team wide receivers. What was your takeaway from what you saw in the Monday night game?
Starting with the offense, you look at the fact that when the whole band of all-stars was out there, it was pretty seamless, even going back to the to the game against the Eagles. Yeah. But then that second unit, I saw Burrow trying to maybe do a little too much, and that's okay. It's the time to do a little too much. Yeah. It's something he's been pushing for all offseason, more opportunities to get reps with the young guys on the team. But that's kind of where you saw the performance slip up a bit. They did, though, finish that third drive with a touchdown.
I'm okay with the quarterback getting touched. I mean, nobody wants to see him get hurt. But I think a lot of people, when it comes to this team, and maybe even others around the NFL when it comes to preseason game, people live in their fears. Oh, don't get him hurt. Don't breathe on the quarterback. Joe Burrow is a robust football player. He plays the game differently than some quarterbacks, and he's not afraid to get his jersey dirty. Now, I didn't like once he started to run back towards his own goal line, but I think what it showed is why Joe feels it's important to play in these games, that he needs the rhythm. He needs to work in order to be like he's in mid-season form when they play week 1 against the Cleveland Browns.
What was funny to me about those plays where he was running around was they were the polar opposite of the plays that he had that stand out the most from week 1 against the Patriots last season. Last year, you saw him spending the whole game saying, how quickly can I get rid of the ball? And there was absolutely no even looking towards being any sort of creative. And so the fact that he recognized, all right, I can push myself a bit here. I can challenge myself a bit here, try to make a play. Now, did he go too far? Yes. But ultimately, again, they scored on 2 of the 3 drives, and they overcame some offensive line concerns and some penalties and different stuff like that. Overall, a very, very successful training camp and preseason for Burrow and the offense.
Here's what I'm going to go with and want to get your thoughts on it. I think lost in all of that was that he got some reliable reps with the second team wide receivers. We saw Andre Yosivas come up big like he always does. When Joe needs him to make a play, he makes a play. Charlie Jones, I thought it was an absolute dime that Joe threw against a real tight window on the touchdown pass to Charlie Jones. And then Charlie showed that he can be reliable. And then what about Mitchell Tinsley? I know he didn't catch the ball from Joe, but when Jake Browning came in, it showed that this offense is sustainable with Jake Browning and that Mitchell Tinsley may have found himself a job on the 53-man roster. No way you're sneaking him on the practice squad now.
Whether it's here in Cincinnati or elsewhere, 1,000%. What's so tough is that the Bengals entered this training camp with, I believe, more receivers than any other position on the entire roster. Wow. And Mitchell Tinsley was pretty low on that list. And then to be at the point by the second preseason game where you're on the field with Joe Burrow, where you're one of Jake Browning's number 1 targets with the second unit, it's some of the most improvement I've seen up a depth chart. And it's earned. There's a physicality. There's kind of a twitch that he plays with. He just looks the part, which is an important thing for a receiver to bring to the table. And then again, I always go back to the trust that, on the practice field, we've seen it again last night. We saw it as well. There's just a lot of trust in Mitch Tinsley.
Tinsley had a 13-yard, beautiful adjustment, touchdown reception where he adjusted to the ball to make a play on it. The ball was perfectly put on the back shoulder. He turns around and midair, he makes the snag for a touchdown. Then the 21-yard strike over the top of the defensive back on a pass from Jake Browning. I thought beautifully executed. He seems to have won the trust not just of Joe Burrow, but Jake Browning. And I think the way that I heard Zach Taylor talk about him after the game, How much could we see him maybe ascending even above someone like a Jermaine Burton, who they're waiting to get some consistency out of him? If that would have been Jermaine Burton making those plays on Monday night, you and I both know there would be an eruption at Paycor Stadium.
The difference here and the difference at that point specifically is going to be special teams. Yeah. The fact that Jermaine Burton has shown some strength as a kick returner does help him in that way. And then just as a true straight line deep threat, they feel like that gives them a nice change of pace. Now we'll see. That now has become maybe a battle that you look at more closely than you would have earlier in camp. But I'd have to do a closer dive, but just overall off the top of my head, I can't think of clear paths to specific special teams roles for Mitch Tinsley, especially because the gunner spots seem to be pretty set between Tyson Anderson and between DJ Ivey. So again, we'll see, but Tinsley is a guy that, again, has proven that he belongs on an NFL roster.
All right, Charlie, now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and we're talking about the Cincinnati Bengals run defense, or the lack thereof. For the second straight week, they allowed the opponent in the preseason to just run right up and down the field without very little resistance at the point of attack. Last week, the Eagles rushed for 132 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. In the Monday night game, the Washington Commanders, 185 yards on the ground, more gaping holes exploding up front. We saw guys going the wrong way around blocks. We saw guys that did not have what we call gap integrity at the point of attack. Some of these things can be addressed, but we also saw missed tackles at the second level of the defense, and we saw secondary defenders taking poor angles. It was bad all the way around on defense. And now as we sit here, do you know the Bengals have allowed the most explosive runs through the first 2 weeks of the preseason? They've given up 12 runs of 10 yards or more, by far more than any other team in the preseason. And right now, Al Godin doesn't like what he sees, I'm sure. And we're all wondering if this is a defense that is, again, going to keep this team from reaching the levels that it wants to accomplish.
Well, I don't think there's any wondering. I think we just know what this defense is. I think the best case scenario is that the defense ideally maybe treads enough water and is the 20th to 25th-ish best unit in the league. You win a few games early on the backs of your offense, on the back of your offense, and then by week 8, week 10, you start to see the defense solidify, form an identity. You maybe have some breakout players who start hitting their stride. The young guys know what they're doing more and play with more confidence. To me, this is a long-term process, and I'm not going to overreact from 2 preseason games, but the overreaction is just what we thought this defense was all along. So this was always what the starting point was going to be. Even if they'd knocked the walls down in training camp with an unbelievable performance, you'd still have to be concerned about this defense because they'd have to do it when the lights are really on. So instead, it's been a struggle. And I'm just at the same point I'd be regardless, which is this is going to be a process. Let's see where it's at in November.
Yeah, in that first preseason game, I think they allowed the Eagles to score touchdowns on 4 of their first 5 possessions in the first half. In the Monday night game against the Washington Commanders, they gave up 14 points on 7 plays in the first quarter. I mean, that's non-existent defensively. What have you heard from the coaches? What have been some of the things? I know I pointed out poor angles, taking, bad angles to the ball, the gap integrity at 2 guys in one gap, which leaves a gaping hole on the other side. What have you heard from some of the coaches? What have they said in some of the post-game comments, areas they need to address defensively?
Well, they didn't highlight these players and call them out publicly specifically. There were just obvious, clear as day moments for Demetrius Knight and for Jordan Battle where they were either out of position or off balance or not doing the right thing. And those are 2 critical guys. Those are 2 guys who you look at just on paper and say, as a strong safety and as an outside backer, should be run defense-oriented, run defense-minded players, bringing a physicality and an oomph to the line of scrimmage. Those are 2 guys who have room to keep kind of developing in that area as well. You can say the same thing about Chris Jenkins up front, setting an anchor against the run. I think you want to, you wish you'd be seeing more from McKinley Jackson this summer. He's had a very quiet camp. Shamar Stewart needs to be cleaner in terms of his technique and his approach on specific plays. So kind of what you hear is collectively the young guys. And then if you go in the film, you can see some of those more individual specific examples of how much needs to get better.
For me, after attending practice, Jordan Battle looks awesome in practice. I mean, I've seen him make one play after another that leads to tremendous encouragement that this guy is not only ready to be a starter, that he's going to be a leader on this defense. Good communicator, making critical plays, intercepting Joe Burrow down inside the red zone, doing some very tough and challenging practices. But then when I watched Jaden Daniels run the ball in from 14 yards out, he's surrounded by 3 defenders, and they don't even pull his flag. I mean, they don't even hit him. This was a case where the quarterback wasn't sliding, and for whatever reason, they all seemed to let up, pull up, and let him score. For me, that was very alarming. What's the takeaway there after watching that play where we had saw these players perform so well in practice but not be able to carry it over into the game?
I look at a big picture. Like, it is going to be maybe one step forward, one step back, or 2 steps forward, one step back, maybe 3 steps forward and 2 steps back for a lot of guys this season. Like, there are going to be nice flash moments where you're genuinely and realistically encouraged, and then there are going to be negative plays. That's just what it's going to be. That's how it's going to feel this season because of how much is changing and how young the defense is. And it's a group where, again, ideally for them, the good outweighs the bad, but it's not going to just be a straight line arrow up to being a top 10 unit in the league. It's going to be a more of a choppy, not a bar graph, but that line graph, if you will, in terms of the ascent that this defense takes.
Look, I've been able to attend practice. I watch very intently the things that are being worked on in practice to see if those things carry over. First of all, to see if they're being taught, how they're being taught. And this team works on tackling. They work with the defensive backs and the linebacker with the footwork, gathering yourself, putting yourself in position to make tackles. You can't tackle live in practice. There's no way. But getting into the position with your footwork, dropping your weight and getting down to be able to strike on a ball carrier. The coaches are giving these players everything that they can do to make sure they're prepared for those moments. I do believe that in today's NFL, that if you're a defensive player, you should be hungry to tackle somebody because you can't hit anybody in practice. You can't hit anybody in a joint session, right? That by the time you get into a game, man, you should be salivating to make contact and drop the pain on your opponent. But here we are in our game today. We have a quarterback who's surrounded by 3 defenders, and not one of them takes the opportunity to lay this guy away.
What would have been like when you were playing in the meeting room the next day if something like that happened?
Oh no, you're getting embarrassed. For one, your teammates are like, "What the hell was that, man? What's going on?" And the coaches are definitely letting you have it. That play is going to be played in front of your team, in front of your defensive players, your teammates, and it's going to show you turning down the opportunity to be physical. And that's really, I think, what's most alarming is that in our game we should not have to really ask you to be a physical, imposing player. Like, to me, that's what a player brings to the table, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. You should be salivating to hit the opponent. You should be eager to impose your physicality on the other team. And that happens particularly on run plays, when you're taking on blocks, when you're making a tackle in the open field. You should be enthusiastic and flying around, man, wanting to hit somebody and wanting to make them feel the pain. And whenever you get to square up on a quarterback, he feels like he doesn't have to slide or step out of bounds when he sees your number. He's almost challenging you in the way. He's challenging. He's calling you out by like, "Oh, no, man, you ain't bringing it enough. I don't have to fear you." And then what happens, Charlie, that's on film now for other teams to see, right? That's for other players to see that, whoa, this is a guy that ain't going to drop the hammer on you. So, and then you encourage them to drop the hammer on you. So that's something that I think you got to continue to pay attention to. how this is a young defense, and I get it, but you shouldn't have to give them a license to be physical. You shouldn't have to give a. That's something that they should be energetic to impose on their opponents. I want to ask you this because let's look ahead a little bit to the upcoming game against the Indianapolis Colts. And oh, by the way, so in our look ahead segment, it's brought to you by Anjanette Franz of Sipsy Klein. She is the go-to person. She helps the players get settled when they move here to Cincinnati and helps them to get located. So all you got to do is just use the information on the lower third bar, use the QR code to make contact with her for all of your real estate needs. Of course, you're watching the Bleav in Bengal podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. And I want to look ahead to that final preseason game, Charlie, because it's going to be against the Indianapolis Colts. They just named, by the way, Daniel Jones is their starting quarterback. So maybe you're going to get more of Anthony Richardson. He's the kind of quarterback that's going to run it, and he'll drop the hammer on you. So in what way, shape, or form do you think the Bengals defense is going to be tested, and how much will we see of the starters on the defensive side of the ball in this final preseason game?
The plan, at least heading into yesterday, was that it wouldn't be as much, that the main focus in terms of playing starters would be the first two games. Now, you can make a case that should change, but just in general, especially for a defense that just has so much to work on, I'd be in favor of, and I could see them leaning towards, let's just have a good week in practice. Let's make the corrections you can. Let's maybe take some rest and take an opportunity to get healthier, because the defensive line has been pretty banged up. They've had some corners banged up. I could see them making that their priority when Indianapolis comes to town.
I want to hear from you some of the starters who haven't really played a lot. I'm talking on the defensive side of the ball in the preseason. And some of it's due to injury. Some of it is rest and wear and tear. But I haven't seen a lot of Geno Stone. I haven't seen a lot of Dax Hill. I haven't seen a lot of Cam Taylor-Britt. In practice, they look great. I mean, I'm watching them in practice, but haven't seen a lot of them in the preseason game. Who are some of the guys defensively that's been more sideline in these games, but we're going to really need them to show up come game one against the Cleveland Browns?
Yeah, it's funny, Cam Taylor-Britt coming back from a camp injury that kind of kept him out for a bit, and then Dax Hill coming back from a torn ACL. The hope and the plan was that, all right, the Washington game would really be a chance for them to get their feet wet and to get downhill and start playing again. But then I don't believe Jaden Daniels threw a single pass because of how quickly the Commanders' rushing attack was making it into the end zone. So it turned out being like no real reps for those guys. So that's preseason football. That's life. And that's a sign of how much the Bengals defense was struggling. Then Geno Stone has started to work his way back from a soft tissue injury. He's on the upswing. They've just been managing BJ Hill. He's been on the upswing in terms of what we've seen on the practice field from him as well. And then no other, from what I sense, big concern in terms of any major injuries looking at the defense.
On the offensive side, I'm sure Joe Burrow is going to want to get some work in, even if it's for one series. How much is Zach Taylor going to have to save Joe from himself? Because if Joe plays, that means other starters, you know how it works. That means the offensive line starters are going to have to play. Maybe not the wide receivers, maybe not the skill position guys, but you're not putting Joe Burrow in this final preseason game without his starting offensive lineman.
Yeah, and the offensive line is already in tough shape. Even Lucas Patrick, their right guard, got dinged up against the Commanders on Monday night. And then looking at the second team too, I believe Cochran, Volson, Ford, and there's one more have all been banged up. So the offensive line is just kind of in shreds right now, just in terms of who's actually available to play. And I don't know if anybody's heard of some of the guys that the Bengals were trotting out on their second team offensive line the other day or on Monday. So Matt Lee's another one who's hurt. Seth McLaughlin's still very early working his way back. So I don't know that they can risk any more injuries on the offensive line for anyone who could make this team by playing any of those guys.
Give me the latest on Trey Hendrickson. We all know going into the Monday night game, the Bengals have told him he can go ahead and seek a trade. We already heard from many who report nationally on this storyline that the Bengals earlier this offseason had turned down an offer for a second-round pick. The Bengals are looking for a first-round pick in compensation for a trade for Trey Hendrickson, as well as another defensive player. That's what's being reported. What are you hearing on your end?
Well, the thing is, if you would accept a trade now, it almost has to be a higher price than what you'd have been willing to accept in March, because what you don't have now is you don't have the ability to turn around and spend those $20 million in cap space that you would then free up by trading Trey Hendrickson. So the price almost would have to be higher now than it was earlier in the summer. And no one was willing to give you that price then. I don't think anyone's willing to raise their offers now from what the market seems like. So I just think this all keeps trending towards Trey Hendrickson playing week 1 for the Bengals.
Let me ask you this. We saw Howie Roseman. He's the general manager, as you well know, of the Philadelphia Eagles. I always say it, Howie's playing chess. Other teams are playing checkers because he makes a trade for John Mechie, who had been a second-round pick with the Houston Texans. Instead of him, he didn't wait for them to cut Mechie because he knows that in the waiver system, there's no way they would have been able to claim him and still get him. But he proactively gave up a mid-level day 3 pick to go ahead and get the player because he knew that he wanted to add him. They did the same with Jahan Dotson last year, making a trade for him in the final weeks leading up to the final cutdown days. And Dotson, as you all know, nearly scored the first touchdown in the Super Bowl. How proactive should the Bengals be within this week before the final cutdown to add to their team an area of needs? And I'm thinking maybe interior defensive line, maybe interior offensive line, or maybe even another defensive back, corner, safety. What are your thoughts there?
That's the thing. They could truly be looking to add at like 7 different positions on the waiver wire with a pre-waiver wire pickup. Mm-hmm. They also don't have a ton to trade like they did in 2021 when they traded Billy Price, because of the way the depth on this team stacks out just isn't that inspiring right now from a trade perspective. So they'd have to get very creative. From what I know, they are pretty reluctant to trade picks, even though they did last year for Khalil Herbert during the season. Yeah. So that makes those type of deals much harder to pull off if you're the Bengals. But yes, they are going to be looking and exploring because of just how many holes there are on this depth chart.
It seems that the teams who make these significant trades, trying to make a run for a Super Bowl, remember the Rams, when they won it in 2021, they added players late, right? And later in the season, like an Odell Beckham Jr., they were able to add some other players that really helped them in their run. Jalen Ramsey was another who was actually a starter, but they added him later during the start of the regular season. And I think it's important to be able to pinpoint that maybe this player isn't working out with the other team, but maybe he can work out for us. I want to throw out a name for you because the Bengals still, I think, in the interior part of their defensive line could still use some assets. And yeah, they're waiting for guys to come on like a Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson. But I'm going to throw out a name in Christian Wilkins, who had played with T. Higgins at Clemson. This guy helped. He was a leader on that team. It didn't work out with the Raiders. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's because he's injured or because he kissed the guy on the forehead. I could care less. All I know is he's a really good football player. And right now he's on the street. Right now you can get him for a ham sandwich. All you got to do is go talk to his agent and sign him, and it gives you immediate depth on your interior defensive line. Now, maybe you have to take a few weeks for him to get healthy, but why are we not kicking the tires on this kind of player?
You know, this isn't the right answer. I'm not defending this answer. That's just never the type of move the Bengals have made. They never go out and get the most inspiring guy. They usually play the margins more for, you know, a guy who maybe we haven't heard of, and sometimes that pans out. Sometimes that's Trey Flowers, who becomes an impact piece on a team that makes it to the Super Bowl. And sometimes it's a guy that we never hear from again. So, but that's just in general been the Bengals' approach here. I bet the injury stuff with Christian Wilkins is a big part of it as well. But defensive tackle certainly is a need for them when you look at this depth chart.
And he's a very top-rated player, providing he's healthy. But maybe that's the reason why he's available, right? Because he was hurt. Now you give him time to get healthy, and maybe factor on him to the midway point or the back end of the season where he could really pay off for you. And next thing you know, you got yourself a first-round pick for very cheap. And I just think it is that kind of creativity when it comes to roster building that the Cincinnati Bengals should be more invested in. Charlie, great show today. We want to thank you. We appreciate you. By the way, before we let you go, final cuts as we're getting down to it. Any surprises? And does Mitchell Tinsley in some way, shape, or form tilt the scale for what could happen on these final cuts as we get toward the final cut down day?
What I see are two spots for Mitch Tinsley, for Tanner Hudson, and for Cam Grandy. And it's almost philosophical. Do you want the field stretching receiver? Do you want the short area goal line option in Hudson in terms of in terms of what they run for him in specific parts of the field? Or do you want the true point of attack 12 personnel blocker in Cam Grandy? A very philosophical decision the Bengals have in front of them.
Yeah, they want to improve the run game. You and I both know that. And look, from everything I'm hearing, the tight ends and that 12 personnel package is going to factor in very heavily in what they do. So to answer the question, I think they're going to lean on the tight end. Well, look, I think Mitchell Tinsley, he's going to find himself on somebody's roster. The guy is a playmaker. We want to thank you for joining us, Charlie. Great stuff per usual. We'll see you again next week along with everyone else. Thanks for joining us, everyone.